I am sitting in a sterile mediator office somewhere in a faceless business center on the outskirts of Atlanta, and it smells like cheap burnt coffee. My hand is resting on an old leather briefcase on the floor. It feels heavy to me, as if it is stuffed with lead instead of paper. Inside lies what I found last night, but I am still shaking. I am shaking with a sticky, animal fear because my wife Sarah is sitting across from me. She looks like $1,000,000. A beige suit, perfect hair, and that exact expression of a holy martyr. I know that look. She has been looking at me like that for the last 6 months, making me feel like a nobody. And even now, knowing what I know, I catch myself thinking, what if I made a mistake? What if I open my mouth right now and she laughs and explains that I understood everything wrong again because I am a stupid, unemployed failure? She always knew how to turn reality inside out. The mediator, Mrs. Patel, is shuffling through documents. That sound cuts my ears. I grip the handle of the briefcase so hard my fingers turn white. I have not slept for 3 days. I have lost 15 pounds. My shirt hangs on me like a sack. I look pathetic, and Sarah sees it. She feeds on this sight. Sarah starts speaking. Her voice trembles perfectly, a rehearsed emotion. She tells the mediator that she cannot take it anymore. That it hurts her to watch me destroy our family. That she has no choice. I listen to her and feel the confidence I saved up all night evaporating. She sounds so convincing. So logical. I was laid off from the bank 6 months ago. At 44 years old, I was thrown out like waste material. And then my sister Jenny relapsed. Substance issues again. She needed rehab, urgently, or she would have died. Mrs. Patel looks at me over her glasses. She says that Mr. Henderson, your wife, is claiming financial infidelity. My throat goes dry. Here it is. It has begun. Sarah turns to me. In her eyes is an ocean of sorrow. She says that David, you withdrew $42,000. You gave our savings to a sister who does not even want to get better. You left us without protection. Shame pierces through me. An old, familiar reflex. I really did give that money away. Yes, it was my personal bonus account that we agreed 10 years ago was mine, but now that she says it out loud, I feel like a criminal. Maybe she is right? Maybe I really did betray her trust? I start to doubt the contents of my briefcase. Maybe those transactions I found are also some kind of mistake? Maybe I am just paranoid, looking for an excuse for my failure? I try to justify myself, my voice breaking into a wheeze. I mumble about our agreement, about how I did not touch her money in the Fidelity Fund. Sarah cuts me off harshly, like a slap in the face. She says that in marriage there is no your money, David. There is only our money. And you blew it. I am not going to drown with you. The mediator nods. She has already chosen a side. She looks at me like I am an irresponsible idiot. Considering this, Mrs. Patel says, Mrs. Henderson demands a full transfer of rights to the house and 70% of your retirement savings. The world stops. The house? My house that I renovated with my own hands? My pension that I saved for 15 years? I look at Sarah. She is smiling barely noticeably at the corners of her lips. She is sure of victory. She thinks I am broken, that I will sign everything right now just to run away from this shame. And at that moment my fear disappears. She crossed the line. She does not just want a divorce. She wants to destroy me. She wants to take everything, hiding behind morality. My doubts dissolve. I remember what lies in the briefcase at my feet. I remember what I saw in her bank statements at 3 a.m. I am not paranoid. I am an analyst. And I know what the numbers of lies look like. I slowly exhale. I lift the heavy briefcase onto my knees. I click the lock. The sound comes out loud, like a gunshot in the silence. Sarah glances sideways at the briefcase. A shadow of worry flashes in her eyes, the first real feeling all morning. I say that before we discuss my debt, and my voice no longer trembles, it becomes cold and hard. I would like to clarify one point about our money. I take out the folder. My hands are still shaking a little, but now not from fear, but from adrenaline. I tell Mrs. Patel, not looking at my wife, but looking at the mediator, that Sarah claims I squandered family assets. But last night I conducted an audit of our accounts. And I found something interesting about the so-called charity fund where my wife has been transferring money for the last 3 years. I see out of the corner of my eye how Sarah turns pale. The martyr mask slips off, exposing panic. She starts to say something, but her voice fails her. I put the first printout on the table. I say here are transfers for $65,000. The recipient is a company that is not in the charity registry. But it is in the registry of commercial firms. And the owner of this firm is Mark, Sarah's cousin. The silence in the room becomes dead. Mrs. Patel freezes with her pen in hand. Sarah jumps up. She shouts that I have no right. That these are her private affairs. I look up at her. Now I see right through her. I return her own words to her, saying that in marriage there are no private affairs, Sarah. There are only ours. And it seems she forgot to explain to the mediator why our money went to buy a cottage registered to her brother. I take out the second statement. The final nail. Sarah sinks into the chair. She realizes that I am not just defending myself. I came for her. To understand how I ended up in that office with a folder of compromising material on my knees, you need to rewind the tape. You need to go back exactly 6 months into the past, when my life, which seemed stable and predictable, suddenly flew off the rails with stomach-turning speed. It did not start with my sister's problems or my wife's betrayal. It all started with a notification on Zoom. 6 months ago, I was a senior analyst at a large logistics firm, making $120,000 a year, and feeling like the head of the family. And then, on one gray Tuesday, I and 200 other employees were cut off from our corporate email and informed that our positions were being optimized in favor of artificial intelligence. I remember driving home. I felt not just unemployed, but defective. I expected that when I crossed the threshold, my wife would hug me, pour me a whiskey, and say that we were a team and we would break through. After all, we had been together for 15 years. But instead of support, I crashed into a wall of icy contempt. When I told Sarah that I had been fired, her face did not even twitch with sympathy. The first thing she asked was not about how I was feeling, but about how we were going to fly to Cabo for our vacation in November. She immediately started pacing the kitchen, wringing her hands, and wailing about what she would tell her friends now. She declared that I should not tell anyone about losing my job, especially our neighbors the Pattersons, because they were having a dinner party on Saturday, and she was not going to blush explaining why her husband was now sitting at home. That evening, I felt for the first time not like a partner, but like a broken accessory that was ruining her image. And that was just the beginning. The following weeks turned into sophisticated torture. Sarah did not support me, she was ashamed of me. I became her dirty secret. Every time I tried to save money on groceries and suggested cooking at home instead of going to restaurants, she rolled her eyes and said she was not going to choke on cheap food because of my incompetence. My attempts to distract myself by working in the garden, which I always loved, she called digging in the dirt, worthy only of a handyman, but certainly not a man of her level. She methodically, day after day, beat the remains of my self-respect out of me, suggesting that I was a loser dragging her to the bottom. And then that call came. It was from the hospital. Jenny, my younger sister. Another breakdown. The doctors said they barely brought her back and that her body would not take anymore. She needed a long course in a good closed center where they actually help people deal with dependency, not just keep them locked up. The price tag was $42,000. I remember panic seizing me, mixed with determination. This was my sister, the only family I had left after my father died. I went to Sarah with trembling hands, but with a firm certainty that here she would understand me. I explained the situation and asked to take money from our joint savings. I swore I would find any job, even as a loader, and return every cent within a year. I begged her because a life was at stake. Sarah's reaction was scarier than any scream. She did not even look up from her phone where she was scrolling through her social media feed. She simply said no. Calmly, casually, as if I had asked to buy a new television and not save a human being. She declared she would not give a single cent of our money to that bottomless pit. She called Jenny a burden and said if she wanted to destroy her life with substances, she could do it for free in a state clinic. At that moment, something inside me snapped. For the first time in my life, I lost it. I started shouting. I tried to reach her conscience, asking how she could be so cruel. In a fit of powerless rage, I threw a plate on the floor, and it shattered into pieces. No, I am not proud of it. I am not a saint. But I was desperate. Sarah looked at the shards, then at me, and in her eyes, I saw cold calculation. She was not scared. She took out her phone and dialed 911. She calmly informed the dispatcher that her husband was acting irrationally, destroying furniture, and threatening her physical safety. I stood and listened to this, unable to believe my ears. She was painting me as a monster to get rid of a problem. When the police arrived, they gave me a choice. Either I leave voluntarily to cool off, or they book me for domestic violence. I had to pack a bag and leave. That night, I withdrew money from my old investment account, the very one we had agreed on as my personal stash, and transferred it to the clinic. I saved my sister. But when I tried to return home 2 days later, the locks had been changed. There was a note on the door in which Sarah informed me that she was filing for divorce and that any attempts to enter the house would be considered trespassing on private property. So I ended up in a cheap motel on the outskirts, in a room that smelled of cigarettes and hopelessness. I ate instant noodles, slept on a sagging mattress, and thought my life was over. Sarah launched a real campaign against me. She told all our mutual friends that I stole family money not for my sister's treatment, but for my own vices. She hinted that I had issues with substances myself. People I had known for years stopped answering my calls. I found myself in total isolation, crushed by guilt and injustice. I spent nights staring at the yellow-stained ceiling, replaying the same thought in my head. Why? Why was she so furious over $40,000? We had about $80,000 in liquid assets in our joint savings account, plus investments. We were not starving. My spending was significant, but not critical. Her reaction was disproportionate to the problem. It was a reaction not to spending money, but to something else. And then, on the third night of insomnia, my analyst brain, which I thought was useless, suddenly switched on. I stopped feeling sorry for myself and started thinking. I remembered how frantically Sarah guarded her laptop in recent months. How she changed passwords. How nervous she got when letters from the bank arrived. I opened my old laptop. I still had access to our joint online banking, the password to which she, in her overconfidence, forgot to change. I started reviewing transaction history not for a month, but for the last 3 years. At first, everything seemed clean. Mortgage, insurance, the lease on her Mercedes, groceries, restaurants. But then I noticed a pattern. Every time Sarah closed a big real estate deal and a commission hit the account, exactly 2 days later an outgoing transfer occurred. The amounts varied. $500, $800, sometimes $1,200. The recipient was listed as an organization with the harmless name GF Charity Fund. I remembered Sarah casually mentioning a couple of years ago that she started doing charity work to optimize taxes. She said she was helping some local animal shelter. Back then, like a complete fool, I was touched by her kindness. I thought about how caring she was. I exported all the data into a spreadsheet. I summed up these small, unnoticeable transfers over 3 years. And when I saw the final figure, my breath caught in my throat. $65,000. Sarah, who once kicked a stray dog in a parking lot for getting too close to her car, spent $65,000 on charity. It was nonsense. I started searching for information about the fund. No website. No mentions in the lists of registered nonprofit organizations. It was a shell. I went into the Georgia State Registry of Legal Entities. And there I found it. A company called GF Holdings LLC. Registered 3 years ago. Business type was asset management. And the owner was listed as Mark Thompson. Mark. Her cousin. The same Mark who always pretended to be an unrecognized genius, lived in a trailer, and borrowed $200 from us until payday. Sarah always called him a loser. But now it turned out that this loser was managing a company where my wife was draining tens of thousands of dollars from our family budget. At that moment, the picture began to come together. She was not donating money. She was siphoning it off. She was stealing from us, from me, dollar by dollar, for years. But $65,000 was a lot, but not enough to buy Mark's silence. There had to be something else. I felt like I was missing a huge piece of the puzzle. I went back to the statements, looking for large sums. And then it hit me. My father's inheritance. 2 years ago, when he died, I received an insurance payout of $100,000. I told Sarah back then to put it in a separate savings account with interest, for our old age. I trusted her to manage that money. I tried to log into that specific account. The password did not work. My hands were shaking when I called the bank support line, pretending I forgot my login details. The operator restored access. I logged into the personal cabinet and saw the balance. $0.00. I looked at the transaction history. August 14th. Exactly 3 days before I was fired. 1 transaction. Full withdrawal of funds. $100,000 went to the account of the very same company, GF Holdings. I sat in that motel room at 3 a.m, looking at the glowing screen, and felt the David who loved his wife dying inside me. She knew. She knew I might get fired, or she was simply preparing a landing pad for her escape. She stole my late father's money, transferred it to her brother's firm, and then, when I spent $40,000 to save my sister, she staged a show with the police and a divorce to make me look guilty and take the rest. It was not just betrayal. It was cold-blooded financial murder. And she thought I was too weak and stupid to notice. I closed the laptop, and for the first time in a long time, I felt no fear or pain. I felt icy, crystal-clear rage. I needed only one piece of proof. The final nail. And I knew where to find it. I knew I needed more than just bank statements. The court system, especially in divorce cases, is a giant bureaucratic machine, and Sarah was smart enough to invent 1,000 excuses for those transfers. She could claim it was a loan to her brother, or a bad investment, or that I had given verbal consent and was now just being vindictive. I needed something undeniable. I needed a motive and physical proof of where my father's money went. I spent the rest of the night on the county website, combing through real estate records. It was not hard if you knew what to look for. The company GF Holdings LLC popped up in a transaction just 2 weeks ago. I found the deed. On August 14th, exactly 3 days before I was kicked out of my job, this firm purchased a property on Lake Lanier. The cost of the house was $450,000. A down payment of $150,000 was made in cash, and the rest was mortgaged in Mark Thompson's name. The numbers lined up perfectly. $100,000 from my father's inheritance and another $50,000 that Sarah had likely skimmed from those small transactions over 3 years. They bought a house. A lake house that Sarah and I had dreamed about for the last 5 years. We spent hours discussing how we would buy a cottage there, how we would spend our old age looking at the water. It turns out she really did plan to spend her old age there, just not with me. I could not sit still in the motel. The clock showed 4 a.m, but adrenaline was driving me forward. I got in the car and drove north to the lake. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I had to make sure it was not just a line in a database, but a real building made of brick and wood, built on my trust and stolen money. The drive took about an hour. When I pulled up to the address, the sky was just starting to turn gray. The house stood at the end of a cul-de-sac, hidden by trees. It was a beautiful cottage with a large porch and a view of the dock. But what struck me most was the car parked at the entrance. It was a white Mercedes. My wife's car. The very same car for which I continued to pay the lease even now, living in a cheap motel. So she was not at a friend's house, as she told our mutual acquaintances. And not at her mother's. She was here. In a house bought with my money. I turned off the engine and quietly got out of the car. It was quiet all around, just the sound of water and the rustling of leaves. I made my way through the bushes to the backyard. Lights were on in the windows of the first floor. The curtains were not fully drawn, leaving a small gap. I moved closer, trying not to step on any branches. I felt like a thief in my own house, and bile rose in my throat from that feeling. I looked inside. Sarah and Mark were sitting in the living room. They looked relaxed. On the table stood an open bottle of wine. I recognized the label. It was an expensive Cabernet from my collection that I had been saving for a special occasion. They were celebrating. The window was cracked open for air, and I could hear their voices. I took out my phone and turned on the voice recorder. I needed every word. Sarah was laughing. It was that ringing, carefree laugh that I had not heard in years. She was telling Mark that David, meaning me, was so pathetic it was actually funny. She described how I stood on my knees before her begging for money for my sister's clinic, and how disgusted she felt looking at it. Mark was agreeing with her, asking if she was afraid I would start digging. He was always cowardly, and now I could hear anxiety in his voice. He asked what would happen if I found their firm. Sarah's answer is something I will remember for the rest of my life. She snorted and said that I only see numbers in my reports, but I do not see people at all. She called me a doormat. She said that I think she still loves me, although in reality, she stopped respecting me 5 years ago when I refused a more aggressive career path for the sake of a quiet life. She added that now they would sue me for the rest of my retirement savings, accusing me of embezzlement, and then she could finally move into this house, and I could go live in a box under a bridge with my problem sister. I stood there in the damp grass, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. At that moment, the last hope died. Up until this second, some stupid, naive part of me was still looking for excuses for her. Maybe she was confused? Maybe it was a midlife crisis? But no. This was pure, distilled cynicism. She did not just fall out of love with me. She despised me. She considered me a resource that could be squeezed dry and thrown away. I did not break into the house. I did not smash windows or make a scene. That would have been too easy for her. She would have called the police again, and I would have finally turned into the unstable aggressor she painted me to be. No. I had a weapon in my hands scarier than a brick. I had the truth. I quietly turned around, got in the car, and drove away. Now I was ready for the meeting at the mediator's office. And here we are again in the present tense. In Mrs. Patel's stuffy office. I just put the statements of transfers to the shell company's accounts on the table. The silence is so thick you can hear the lamp buzzing under the ceiling. Sarah is still trying to keep a straight face, although I see panic starting to seep through her mask. She jumps up from her chair and starts shouting that this is a violation of her privacy, that I had no right to pry into her personal affairs. She tries to seize the initiative, pressing with her voice as she always did. She turns to the mediator and declares that these transfers were investments she made for our common good. She just wanted to surprise me when they paid off. The audacity. Even cornered, she continues to lie. I look at her calmly and say that the surprise was a success. Then I take the third document out of the folder, a copy of the deed for the purchase of the house on Lake Lanier. I place it on top of the bank statements. I ask her if she wants to tell Mrs. Patel how exactly this house, registered to her brother, was supposed to be our joint investment if my name is not mentioned anywhere in the documents, and the money for the down payment was stolen from my inheritance account. The mediator takes the document. Her eyebrows shoot up. She is a professional and has seen a lot, but such a brazen scheme impresses even her. She looks at Sarah with a completely different look. Now she does not see the unhappy wife of a drug-dependent spender, but a calculating fraudster. Mrs. Patel dryly notes that hiding assets and withdrawing large sums from the family budget before filing for divorce can qualify as financial fraud. Sarah turns pale. She realizes the investment story has crumbled. She tries to find a new way out. She starts babbling something about how Mark was just helping her save money because I was unstable, and she was afraid I would blow everything on my sister's problems. And then I take out my phone. I say that I foresaw such a turn. I say that last night I was at the lake house. And that I accidentally overheard their conversation. I press the play button. Sarah's voice fills the office. It sounds clear and loud, without interference. Everyone hears her laugh. Everyone hears her call me pathetic. Everyone hears her admit she planned to take my pension. Everyone hears her say I should live in a box under a bridge. This is not just proof of financial scheming. It is proof of her moral ugliness. Sarah freezes. She looks at the phone as if it were a poisonous snake. She opens her mouth to say something but makes no sound. All her arrogance, all her confidence disappears in 1 second. She slowly sinks back into the chair, covering her face with her hands. The mediator takes off her glasses and puts them on the table. She looks at Sarah with undisguised disgust. She says that in light of the revealed circumstances, the mediation process has likely reached a dead end, and we will have to transfer the case to court. But she also adds, looking straight at Sarah, that judges really do not like it when one spouse tries to cheat the system and leave the other destitute using false accusations. She warns that the consequences could be catastrophic, up to criminal prosecution for fraud. I gather my papers back into the briefcase. My hands are no longer shaking. I feel a strange lightness. The pain did not go away, no. The betrayal still burned inside like a hot coal. But the fear was gone. I was no longer a victim. I looked at the woman I had loved for 15 years and saw nothing but emptiness. She was a stranger. And this stranger had just lost the war she herself started. I stood up and said that my conditions were changing. Now I am not just defending my $42,000. Now I demand a full audit of all accounts for the last 3 years, the return of all stolen funds, including my father's inheritance, and the sale of the lake house to cover damages. And if Sarah does not agree to this voluntarily right now, I will hand over the recording of the conversation and the documents about her brother's firm to the prosecutor's office. Sarah looked up at me. There were tears in her eyes, but they were tears of anger and defeat. She nodded. Barely noticeably, but she nodded. She knew I was not bluffing. Here is what happened right after I laid my cards on the table. It was not like a movie scene where the villain walks off into the sunset or throws a dramatic tantrum. It was more like watching a cheap balloon deflate. The air went out of Sarah instantly. She sat in her chair, slumped over, and suddenly looked her age, or even older. All her polish, all that armor of a successful woman just crumbled, leaving a terrified con artist who had been caught red-handed. The mediator, Mrs. Patel, closed her folder with a loud clap that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet office. She said in a cold, official tone that in this situation, she was obligated to terminate the voluntary mediation process. She explained that the evidence presented pointed to possible criminal offenses, including fraud and concealment of income, and she strongly recommended that Sarah find herself a good lawyer, and not a family law attorney, but a criminal defense one. I saw the realization hit Sarah. The word criminal hit her harder than the word divorce. She started babbling incoherently, trying to appeal to me. She said we could settle everything right here and now, that there was no need to involve judges and prosecutors. She even tried to smile that same pathetic, ingratiating smile she used to use when begging for expensive gifts. She said she was ready to sign the house over to me, if only I would not move forward with these papers. I simply gathered my documents, fastened my briefcase, and stood up. I looked down at her and felt a surprising indifference. No pity. No desire to kick her while she was down. I just told her that the time for deals passed yesterday when she tried to leave me destitute. I walked out of the office without looking back, leaving her alone with the mediator and the ruins of her plans. The next 2 months turned into a legal meat grinder. But this time, I was not the one inside the grinder. I hired a lawyer, an old shark who came highly recommended by friends. When he saw my spreadsheets and listened to the recording, he actually whistled. He said that in 30 years of practice, he had rarely seen such a brazen and stupid scheme. We filed a lawsuit not just for divorce, but for damages resulting from fraudulent activities. The court hearing was short and brutal. The judge, a woman in her 60s with a stern gaze, carefully studied the bank statements and the documents for GF Holdings. Sarah had to answer questions under oath. It was a pathetic spectacle. She tried to squirm, saying I was emotionally unstable and she was just saving the family capital. But the judge interrupted her and asked how exactly buying a house in her brother's name saved the family capital if that asset did not legally belong to the family. Sarah was silent. She had nothing to say. The court's decision was devastating. The judge ruled that all funds transferred to the fake charity fund were considered stolen from the family budget. Sarah was ordered to return half of the $65,000 to me, as well as fully reimburse the $100,000 of my inheritance, since that money was designated for a specific purpose and was not subject to division. Moreover, considering the attempt to hide assets, the judge awarded me our current house in its entirety, stripping Sarah of her share as a penalty. But the sweetest part started later. The IRS became interested in the activities of the GF Charity Fund. It turned out Sarah was writing off these transfers as donations on her tax returns, reducing her taxable income. And Mark, her brother, was not paying taxes on the incoming sums, treating them as investments. When the tax agents dug deeper, the scheme collapsed like a house of cards. Now a case has been opened against both of them for tax evasion and fraud. This threatens them not just with fines, but with real prison time. And what about the lake house? That is a separate story of karma. Since the money for the down payment was deemed stolen by the court, the assets of Mark's company were frozen. Mark, this great businessman, naturally had no legal income to pay the huge mortgage. Without infusions from Sarah, he missed the very first payment. The bank began the foreclosure process. The house that was supposed to be their trophy, their hideout, went under the hammer for debts. They lost everything. The down payment, the house itself, and their reputations. I heard from mutual acquaintances that Mark is now blaming Sarah for everything. He tells everyone that she dragged him into the scam, that he just wanted to help his sister. Sibling love ended exactly where financial problems began. They are fighting like spiders in a jar, trying to shift the blame onto each other before the investigators. Sarah lost not only money. She lost face. In our suburb, news spreads faster than a forest fire. Information that a respected realtor was robbing her husband and using shell companies became a bombshell. Clients began tearing up contracts with her. The real estate agency where she worked and was considered a star quietly fired her to avoid staining their reputation. Her Instagram, which was a showcase of her successful life, is now closed because people were writing things in the comments that were impossible to read. She moved from her luxury rental apartment to some hole on the outskirts. Her white Mercedes was taken by the leasing company because I, naturally, stopped paying for it the same day I walked out of the mediator's office. I saw her once in town, by accident, through the windshield of my car. She was standing at a bus stop, in the rain, without an umbrella. She looked tired, aged, and incredibly lonely. I thought I would feel triumph. I thought I would want to roll down the window and shout something mean at her. But I felt only emptiness. It was like looking at the ashes of a house you once loved. You know the fire is out, but you cannot live there anymore. My sister Jenny, by the way, became my main anchor during this time. She finished her rehab course and moved into my house, which now fully belonged to me. She got a job at a bakery, gets up at 5 in the morning, smells like vanilla, and looks more alive than she has in the last 10 years. We renovated the living room, threw out all the furniture Sarah chose, and repainted the walls. We were burning out the memory of the past. Sometimes, at night, I still wake up from nightmares. I dream that I am back in that motel, jobless, broke, and everyone thinks I am an addict. But then I open my eyes, see my bedroom, hear the dog breathing in the next room, a dog Jenny and I got from a shelter, a real dog, not the accessory Sarah wanted, and I realize it is all over. I survived. But this story had one more final twist that I did not expect. I thought Sarah had reached rock bottom, but it turned out someone could knock from below. A week ago, Mark's lawyer called me. Yes, that slimeball hired a lawyer to try and cut a deal with the prosecution. He offered to testify against Sarah in exchange for a lighter sentence. He claimed he had proof that the idea to steal my father's inheritance belonged exclusively to Sarah and that she blackmailed him into participating in the scheme. It was disgusting. A brother selling out his sister to save his own skin. But the most interesting part was something else. Mark's lawyer passed on one detail to me through my attorney, hoping for my leniency in the civil suit. It turns out those $150,000 were not the only planned big purchase. Mark said Sarah was planning another deal. She was going to take out a life insurance policy on the firm. In my name. When I heard this, I went cold inside. I remembered how a couple of months ago, before I was fired, Sarah persistently asked me to undergo a full medical examination, allegedly to review the terms of our family insurance. She said she found a great rate. Now the puzzle came together completely. She did not just want to rob me. She was preparing for the possibility that I could become an even more valuable asset to her. A dead asset. Of course, there was no direct proof of preparation for a crime, only the words of a frightened accomplice. But that was enough to understand the abyss I had been standing on the edge of. I did not just lose a wife. I escaped a monster. Yesterday was the finale. The official divorce. We did not even see each other. Everything went through the lawyers. I received the documents by mail. The decree of divorce. A sheet of paper that crossed out 15 years of life. I put it in that same briefcase where the evidence of her guilt lay. In the evening, I sat on the porch of my house. The very house Sarah wanted to take away. I drank tea, looked at the sunset, and thought about how strangely life works. 6 months ago, I was sure losing my job was the worst thing that could happen to me. Now I realized that getting fired was my salvation. If I had stayed at my job, I never would have looked into the details of the accounts. I would have continued working like an ox while she and Mark siphoned off money, bought houses, and possibly arranged that insurance policy. I would have remained a blind, convenient husband until it was too late. My phone chimed. It was a notification from the bank. The first installment of the repayment from Sarah had arrived, money raised from selling her jewelry and designer bags. It was a funny amount compared to what she stole, but it was a start. I transferred that money to Jenny's account. Let it be her safety net. Karma works in mysterious ways. The money that was supposed to destroy my family will now help rebuild it. I do not know what will happen to Sarah next. They say the criminal trial is scheduled for spring. She faces up to 5 years. I do not care. To me, she died the night I stood under the window of the lake house. Now, there is only me, my sister, our dog, and the silence. And believe me, that silence is worth more than any lake house. Yesterday the mailman brought an envelope from the court. It was not a celebratory moment. There was no background music, no feeling of crossing a finish line. Just a thick white envelope sitting on top of the electric bill and some pizza coupons. Inside was the document dissolving my marriage. One sheet of paper with a stamp that officially confirmed that 15 years of my life, all our vows, all our plans for the future, were now legally void. I put that sheet on the kitchen table and looked at it for a long time. Strange, but I felt neither the joy of victory nor the bitterness of loss. I felt only a huge, all-consuming fatigue. It was like that feeling when you finally take off a heavy backpack after a hike that lasted for days. Your back still aches, your legs are buzzing, but you can finally stand up straight. Mark's lawyer, trying to bargain for a plea deal for his client, passed on some more details to us. These were not just rumors, but confirmed correspondence. It turns out Sarah did not just want to buy a lake house. She was actively consulting with lawyers about how to protect assets in the event of my sudden death or incapacitation. The story about the life insurance policy that I suspected turned out to be true. She was looking for a policy with maximum coverage that would pay out even in cases of household accidents. When I found out about this, a real chill went through me. I remembered how often she asked me to fix the roof or cut branches on the old oak tree, even though she used to always call professionals for that. Maybe it is my paranoia, inflated by stress, but now I look at those requests from a completely different angle. I did not just divorce a greedy woman. I possibly avoided becoming a tragic headline in the local newspaper. This realization killed the last remains of pity I had for her. Now my life looks completely different. It is smaller, quieter, and probably poorer financially, but it is real. I live in our old house, which is now only mine. I sold most of the furniture Sarah chose. All those beige sofas you could not sit on in jeans, all those fragile vases, everything went to a garage sale. Instead, I bought a huge, soft armchair you can sink into. Jenny, my sister, lives in the guest room. She has been clean for almost 9 months now. She works at a local bakery, smells like cinnamon and yeast, and every evening we have dinner together. We talk about simple things, watch old comedies, and laugh. For the first time in years, I come home and do not feel like I am stepping onto a minefield where every wrong word could trigger a scandal about me not being successful enough. And we also have Buster. He is a dog we picked up from the shelter on the day the judge made the final decision. He is a huge, shaggy mutt with a crooked ear. Sarah would hate him. He sheds, he smells like a dog, and he loves to rest his head on my knees, leaving drool on my pants. But when I look into his eyes, I see loyalty that cannot be bought for any money and cannot be faked for social status. As for Sarah and Mark, their fall was slow and public. In our suburb, news lives a long time. Sarah was fired from all associations and clubs. Her reputation as a realtor is destroyed. No one will trust the keys to their house to a person who is under investigation for fraud. I heard she works as a receptionist at some cheap motel on the highway to make ends meet while waiting for trial. It is an irony of fate. She started by despising me for losing my job, and ended up losing her career, her home, and the respect of everyone she knew. Mark, as far as I know, sold her out completely and now hopes for probation, living with some distant relative. Their alliance built on greed ate them both alive. Yesterday night, around 2 o'clock, my phone rang. The number was hidden. I usually do not answer such calls, but this time I felt who it was. I picked up the phone and heard silence, and then quiet, drunken crying. It was Sarah. She was not screaming, not demanding. She sounded broken. She started speaking disjointedly, asking for forgiveness. She said Mark confused her, that she was in a panic because of my layoff, that she just wanted what was best for us. She begged me to withdraw the lawsuit for damages. She said she had nothing to pay the lawyer with, that she faces real prison time, and that she is afraid. She said a phrase that was supposed to touch me. She asked if 15 years of marriage meant nothing to me. I stood in the dark kitchen, listening to her voice, and tried to find even an echo of my former love. But it was empty there. Like in a burnt-out forest. I remembered how she looked at me in the mediator's office when she demanded to take the house away from me. I remembered how she labeled me an aggressor, calling the police. I remembered the empty account where my father's inheritance should have been. I did not insult her. I did not gloat. I just asked her quietly and calmly if she would have helped me if the situation were reversed. If I had stolen her money and got caught. If I were facing prison. Silence hung in the receiver. A long, heavy silence. She could not lie. She knew the answer, and I knew the answer. She would have destroyed me without blinking an eye. I told her goodbye and hung up. Then I blocked that number, just as I blocked all paths back to that past. I walked out onto the porch. The night was cool. Buster followed me out and nudged my hand with his nose. I looked at the stars. I do not have millions. I do not have a prestigious job. I have a sister with a difficult past, an old house, and a dog. But for the first time in 44 years, I feel truly rich. Because I have what Sarah could never buy with all her stolen money. I have a clear conscience and freedom. And you know what? It was worth every nerve I spent over these 6 months. I survived. I won. And I am finally happy. That is it. That is the whole story. If you like this story and want to listen to even more stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you do not miss new episodes. Remember, your support is very important for the channel to keep growing. And now let us talk frankly. This story leaves a strange aftertaste, does it not? On one hand, Sarah got what she deserved. Karma hit her so hard she is unlikely to recover. But let us look at the situation through the eyes of a cynic. The main character, David, admits he secretly recorded his wife's conversation. He used this ace not just to defend himself, but to literally destroy her life, leaving her homeless and putting her under criminal charges. Some will say this is fair retribution. An eye for an eye. She wanted to take everything from him, and he responded in kind. But here is a question for you that might divide opinions. Where is the line between justice and cruelty? At what point does self-defense turn into revenge? David could have just taken his money and walked away. But he went all the way, initiating the criminal prosecution of the mother of his, well, not children, but the woman he lived with for 15 years. What would you have done? If you found out your spouse had been stealing your money for years and preparing exit strategies, would you just divorce, or would you do everything to see them behind bars? Do you think financial infidelity is worse than physical infidelity? Or did David cross the line by kicking someone when they were down? Write in the comments David is right or it was too cruel. Let us discuss.